Elevate your summer with Osea's best-selling body care set. It's everything you need for radiant summer skin on the go. Featuring travel sizes of Osea's clean, vegan, cruelty-free, and climate-neutral skincare, like their best-selling Undaria algae body oil. Right now, you can get the bestsellers body care set, a $78 value, 33% off. And use code SUMMER to save an additional 10%. That's an additional 10% off at OSEAMalibu.com, code SUMMER.
You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night.
Welcome to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast, where we talk about the continual pursuit of the section hiker.
And I'll spread the word, and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come. And we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Welcome back to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Jester Gayhart, and this is the podcast where we talk about the continual pursuit of the section hiker and what it takes to complete a trail section by section. On today's episode, we have Jasmine Star, aka King Size. I gave Jasmine a new name for this episode. It is called Section Hiker Extraordinaire. As you will hear, Jasmine has thousands of miles under her feet and is torn between section hiking the Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trail. She just loves both so much, but tends to gravitate these days towards the CDT. Jasmine is also section hiking in the Himalayas. As soon as Jasmine told me she was section hiking in the Himalayas, I became her number one fangirl. I am excited for all of you to hear her section hiking accomplishments. Welcome to the podcast, Jasmine.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
I really appreciate you being here. We have a lot to talk about, Jasmine. We've got the Pacific Crest Trail. We've got the Continental Divide Trail. We've got your awesome trip with the Himalaya Trail. But I want to get started. So your trail name is King Size. So let's start off with you telling the listeners how you got that trail name.
All right. Well, I've been section hiking since 2012, and I never got a trail name. I just never, ever got one. And back in 2014, when I was doing my second section, I was going in Northern California down toward Tuolumne Meadows. I came to some trail magic right above Carson Pass, and there were some through hikers there, and we talked for a while. And in a real oddity for me, I was running low on food, and one of the three hikers, her name was Storybook, gave me, well, she said she had a couple of king-size Snickers that she could give me. I was like, oh, no, just give me one. And she insisted on giving me both. And they ended up being crucial because there was big storms and flooding, and the water was too muddy to cook with that night. And so I ended up having to eat king-size Snickers for dinner because I couldn't cook. So that's what happened.
That's not necessarily a bad thing, right?
Well, not really. It's good to have an excuse for it, for sure. So that's what happened back then. And then flash forward to just this September, when I was on my section hike across Oregon and down into Northern California, I stopped at the trail register at the Oregon-California border, where I noticed that the person who had signed right ahead of me was someone named Storybook, the same name as the person who had given me the Snickers. And I thought, oh, could it be her? I really want to see her again. And I caught up with them that evening, and it was Storybook and one of her companions from that time. And so she just decided that my trail name should be King Size, because that's a very important part of the story of the Snickers she gave me. So,
yes, that is awesome. So not only are you King Size, but you also tend to sign your name as Jasmine, just a section hiker Star, on some of the Facebook pages. And originally I thought your trail name was Just a Section Hiker, because we have our own East Coast Just a Section Hiker. So I got excited. So explain to us why you sign your name Jasmine, just a section hiker Star.
Well, I really like to join the long trail class pages on Facebook so that I can have an idea of what conditions are like every year. And that helps me decide what section I want to do. And there are a lot of questions about things that I have some experience with. So sometimes when people ask a question, I might be inclined to answer, but I always feel like I have to give the proviso that I'm just a section hiker so that no one thinks I'm pretending to be a through hiker, even though I have been I have been backpacking since 1988. So even though I'm just a section hiker, I do have some experience to share.
Listen, Jasmine, after we get done talking today, no one's ever going to say that to you again. So we've learned your trail name King Size. I know for certain that you are not just a section hiker, but you also introduced me to another term that I had never heard of in our initial conversation. You said that there are hikers out on the West Coast or on the PCT that call themselves Myth, MYTH. And I was like, what is that, Jasmine? So explain to us what that term means.
Well, Myth stands for multi-year through hiker. And the first time I heard that, I think was also in 2014. I was southbound and I ran into a woman who was northbound. And I think I said to her something along the lines of, oh, well, I'm just a section hiker. And she said she was just doing a section also, but she wasn't just a section hiker. She was a myth, a multi-year through hiker.
Interesting. I'm just going to leave it as it is. It is a new term that I have learned. And who knows, we might start using that over here on the East Coast. So thank you for introducing that to us. I did find it funny, but just another term out in the hiking world. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of things. When did you first hear of long distance backpacking, long distance trails, Pacific Crest Trail? Talk to us about how you actually got into backpacking and all that good stuff.
Well, back in the 1980s, I was an environmental activist, a member of all of the organizations, and I would receive my Sierra Club magazine and read it cover to cover. And the first time I received the outings issue, I was just swept away. I was like a kid in a candy shop. I wanted to do all of the outings, but I was pretty poor and couldn't afford much. So I zeroed in on service trips, which are very inexpensive because they are 10-day trips where people go out into the wilderness or other public lands and do trail maintenance, trail construction, other projects. They've done everything from revegetation to removing airplane wreckage to building an accessible boardwalk. So I signed up. I don't tend to do things halfway. So I signed up for 2 in a row and fell in love with it so much that I became a staff person and started cooking on Sierra Club service trips and got to go backpacking all across the West from Alaska to the Grand Canyon. And I think it was in those same years. I've just always been interested in the outdoors and hiking. And I think long distance hiking called to me. So I'm pretty sure that I would just be reading articles in Backpacker magazine or the Sierra magazine and see about the long trails. And from the very first time I heard of long trails, I just wanted to do them. It must be in my blood.
And this is why I became your East Coast fangirl. And people are going to learn more and more. I mean, that is in and of itself, that's phenomenal. So now you get into this where you stated to me that your section hiking was not very intentional and you spent a long time building your career. And then when you turned 50, something happened. So talk to us about what happened when you turned 50.
When I turned 50, I realized I was getting older, and that
Okay, 50 is not old, Jasmine. That's when people get started, okay?
Well, yeah, and it certainly was for me. And I realized, though, that it was not a good idea to keep putting my dreams on hold because I was getting older. And I had spent quite a few years waiting for different friends and people in my life to want to go on long hikes with me. When I turned 50, I said, that's it. I'm just going to do these trails. I'm going to start doing long distance hiking on my own if I have to. And so I did the John Muir Trail. that year, which is one of the premier trails. It's so gorgeous. I knew it was a good place to start. And when I turned 50 was also when I was diagnosed with arthritis in my right hip. And I was told that I was going to need a hip replacement, which was fairly devastating. And so I decided I needed to start doing everything I possibly could while my body was still able to, which is what I did. And I just walked
Right.
that one hip into the ground and eventually had it replaced.
Well, let's go. Unbelievable. Okay, 50 years old, you're told that you need a hip replacement, and you decide that's it. This is when I'm going to start hiking. So I'm going to do what I got to do. I can't wait around on people. So talk to us about that John Muir Trail hike. And I think it sealed the deal for you as far as your section hiking. So tell us a little bit about that hike and how that persuaded you to pursue your PCT section hiking.
Well, it is such a fantastic trail. It's just one of the best all-around trails. At that point in time, I still had a few people who were willing to go with me, and I wasn't as dedicated to putting in longer days and all of that. So I actually devised a complicated scheme where different people met me for different parts of that trip, and it was just so gorgeous and wonderful. And I guess it's opened my eyes to what's great for me about long trails is how as you keep moving through the landscape, it keeps changing and changing. And over every ridge, it's a new landscape. And that is one of my favorite parts of it. So just getting to see that long stretch of beautiful country really spoke to me and made me want to do more.
Yeah, I'm really jealous that of everyone that's actually been able to hike the John Muir Trail, because getting those permits, it's insane to try to get those permits now. I mean, I've tried for several years to get a JMT permit. It's like, you almost have to give up. So very jealous of that. So that hike kind of kickstarted you into the Pacific Crest Trail. And I know one of the things I'm learning as I talk to the Pacific Crest Trail section hikers is the permit system and how many miles you can hike without a permit, how many miles you need a permit for. So when you started going out, and I think in 2014, and you did the state of Washington, now correct me if I'm wrong, and then 2015, you went back out again. How did the permits work, and talk about those sections during those 2 years?
Oh, okay. Well, in 2014, I actually went back to California and I did the Northern Sierras. I went from Sierra City down south to Tuolumne Meadows, which is where I had started the John Muir Trail. So I was connecting those two up. I was lucky to do the John Muir Trail in 2012 before it became so difficult to get permits. So then for my 2014 hike, I don't think any particular permits were required except just the self-issue permits at trailheads. So that was a pretty easy one. And then I heard about the PCTA's 500-mile permits, that if you're going to cover a stretch of 500 miles or more, you can apply for this. And it covers almost any permit you would need along the way, except for a few national parks. So conveniently, Washington State is about 500 miles. So I just decided I would go for that. And I was wanting to do longer distances anyway. So I have not run into any problems with getting a permit because of being a section hiker and generally going southbound. So getting them through the PCTA has been really easy for me, but I know that it's getting harder, especially for through hikers. And there's going to be some new regulations next year where people aren't going to be allowed to be flipping and skipping and all of that on their through hike permits. So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I've heard about those changes. Yeah, that will be interesting, especially if there ends up being a lot of snow in the Sierra. And I guess people can't skip up and then, go from there north and then come back. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. So let's talk a little bit about what kind of hiker you became. So you started with the John Muir, then you went out, 14, 15 on some section hikes. And you mentioned earlier that you didn't do longer miles, but I think at this point you started maybe doing longer miles. Tell us about who you became as a section hiker and your hiking style.
Well, since I have been hiking for so long, since the mid 80s, I started out with all that old heavy gear we had back then. And, I actually loved my external frame pack. It had all these pockets. It was great. And on service trips, especially those of us who were staff, we carried really big, heavy packs, like 50 or 60 pounds. And we were
Wow.
proud. Yeah, we were proud of it. I mean, it was really different back then. And the year before I did the John Muir Trail, a friend and I did the Wonderland Trail around Mount Rainier. We did about 70 miles of it. And our packs were heavy. And that's when I first started realizing that I was going to need to lighten my load. And if I wanted to, well, especially once I had this hip arthritis, everything I could do to take the stress off my joints. So I just started gradually lightening my load, but I don't think I'll ever be able to be ultralight. And I get a lot of pack shaming out on the trail because my pack's heavier, but I just have my stuff I'm used to and that I like to have. So when I was in Washington, I did work my way up to 20 and 25 mile days. And in my section hike in 2018, which was some more of Northern California, I even had a couple days on up toward 30 miles. When the days are long, I love that. I just like to be walking. My favorite part of it is not the camping, it's the walking. And so when the days are long, I just like to get up early and go and keep going until it's almost dark, and camp and get up and do it again. So I just want to see everything. And I do like to connect it all up. It is important to me. I'm actually missing about 25 miles in Washington State because of fires the year that I did that. So, someday I'll have to go back and pick up those miles again. So
Listen, Jasmine, you're not alone. I totally understand. I'm actually almost done with a second Appalachian Trail section hike, and I go back and forth. Am I going to finish it? Am I not going to finish it? Well, of course I'm going to finish it. I mean, I just can't not. So right. I totally get it. I totally understand. All right. So we've got 2014, 2015, you're working on the Pacific Crest Trail. And then all of a sudden, Jasmine decides to take on the Great Himalayan Trail in 2016. I mean, just this afternoon, I am looking up about this trail. I am in awe. So you have got to tell us why you started, and I'm going to say you section hiked that trail as well, because it took you a couple different summers. So talk to us about that and how that got started, and kind of just walk us through what the Great Himalaya Trail is.
Okay. Well, I do love the high mountains, and I'd always been interested in the Himalaya. And then one time I was just reading, I think it was in the news on the internet, about someone, I think his name was Appa Sherpa, had completed this traverse of the Himalayas. And this was in about 2008. So I just started hearing about the ideas of a Trans-Himalaya route and the Great Himalaya Trail. And it became more and more established over the years. And I can't remember why I decided that 2016 was my year to start it, but it is a 1,100 mile trail from the almost the eastern border of Nepal, all the way to the western border. And I had heard a woman I worked with, her partner is a Sherpa guide on the Great Himalaya Trail, of all things. And so,
okay. Wow.
Yeah, what are the chances? She's Australian. But I told her that I was interested and I was thinking of it. She said that one of the biggest downsides with doing the entire Great Himalaya Trail at once is that with a company, I did it with a trekking company. So these were guided, supported trips. There's really only one company that offers it. And she said the downside of doing the entire GHT with them is that in order to get the whole trip done between the end of winter and before the monsoon season hits in July in Western Nepal, that they start too early. That was her take on it, that the weather is often really harsh in the east. So between how I was getting kind of a lot of pain in my hip, which I still have my original hip at this point, I was starting to get a lot of pain in my hip, and I was concerned about the weather in the first half. And the first half is more technical, has a little bit of, technical pass crossing. So I decided I would start with stage 4 about halfway across Nepal and do the western half because it was generally easier in the time frame. Seemed good to me. So I did do that, and it was a shame in the months leading up to that trip, my hip just got worse and worse. And as the date approached, I felt like, oh, I really shouldn't go. But I did have an ace in the hole, which was I had never had cortisone shot for my hip yet. So so I thought, okay, well, I'll do that. And a lot of people get a miraculous boost from that, and they could get anywhere from weeks to months of relief from pain. And it was fantastic for about the first 12 days. And
no.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So we crossed our first, there's one technical pass in stage 4, and then there's no more after that. And we crossed our first technical pass, and I was struggling with the altitude and having kind of a hard time, but did okay. But then when we got down on the other side, I started having hip pain, and I was thinking, oh my God, I've got to quit. And there were a number of bailout points, but I had a friend who was coming to join me for stage 5. And I thought, well, I can't leave her in the lurch, so I'll just stay on for stage 5, but then maybe I've got to quit. And the pain just got worse and worse. I was taking maximum painkillers, as much as I was allowed to take every single day by the end of the trip. But I just could not bring myself to quit.
No. And Jasmine, the reason I'm not saying anything is I get it, and the listeners are going to get it too. I mean, we're crazy.
We are crazy.
I'm thinking, wow, she's probably just using her trekking poles to kind of lean on one side or the other, pump an Advil every 4 hours or whatever you needed to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I was, and walking was actually one of the more comfortable things, sleeping on the ground, getting in and out of my tent, reaching down. At one point, one of my fellow trekkers was like, if you need us to start tying your boot for you. And I was like, no, if it comes to that, I'm not allowed to be on the trail. So I did finish. I got to the western border of Nepal, and I have an inReach. And while I was about a month out, I contacted my husband. I texted him. I said, call Dr. West. That's the surgeon I was going to be going to. Call Dr. West and schedule my hip replacement as soon as possible. I had really hoped to avoid it. And I looked into all the alternative stem cell, this, that, and the other, but my joint was just so degenerated. So 2 weeks after I got home from that trek, I had my hip replaced and was using a walker.
Wow. But good for you. I mean, good for you that here's the thing. No matter how much it hurt, you knew you were going to get it replaced. So wear it out. Like, just take it all the way down to like nothing, right? And then come home and get it.
Exactly. And, that was part of my rationale at the time. And another part of my rationale was, well, surgery's pretty safe, but things can happen. And so I want to just go ahead and live my dream in case something happens while I'm on the operating table. And they're going to replace this hip. So what does it matter how degenerated it gets? But I will say, if there's anybody out there who's in the same boat as me, that is not the best idea, because I forgot the fundamental lesson is the hip bone is connected to the knee bone, and the knee bone is connected to the ankle bone. And I developed a lot of problems in other parts of my body, some chronic pain in my low back. And I had so much atrophy in my right leg by the time I finally had the hip replaced. So I don't know that I could have brought myself to do it any differently, but I do think I waited too long. I think I destroyed it too much.
Right. Well, hey, we're not promoting anyone to do that, but you know what? Everybody in their mind who's listening to this has done something, whether they walked on feet that had stress fractures, or, toes with their toenails ripped off. Everybody's done, maybe not a hip, Jasmine, but everybody's done something. So you got back from Nepal, you had your hip done. And in 2017, you decided, well, I'm not going to hike on the Pacific Crest Trail. You didn't go back to Nepal. So now you took up a trail, the Continental Divide Trail. So why not, right? You got a new hip. You might as well experience a new trail. So tell us about that decision in section hiking that year.
Yeah, that year, I can't remember which part of the CDT I did in 2017. It might have been in the Wind River Range. So I'm lucky to live in a really beautiful part of the world. I live really close to Grand Teton National Park, and we're really close to the Wind River Range. And so that was just a natural place to start doing some hiking, even before I got these ideas of, completing the long trails. So I had done maybe all of the wins, but then I just started adding more. And yeah, I guess that's right. In 2017, I did the Great Divide Basin, or the Red Desert of the CDT, and had just a really fantastic time doing that. It was my first experience of really scarce water sources. So I was a little nervous about it, but it all worked out fine. So yeah, the CDT appeals for a lot of reasons because it's less well established. There's fewer people on it. It's really close to home. And I love the Continental Divide just as a concept.
And I've heard that Wind River area, is it the Wind River Range?
Yeah, the Wind River Range, or the Winds. It is so
The
beautiful.
Winds.
Yeah,
I have heard once you go there, you don't need to hike anywhere else. That's what people tell me. I've not seen it. So, Jasmine, is that true?
It is pretty gorgeous. I would say John Muir Trail is probably more gorgeous, but they're pretty similar. There's just a lot of rocky peaks and lakes and high elevations. So it is really gorgeous, definitely. And then you get the added excitement of grizzly bears.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And
that's a whole nother thing.
It is. And that's one of the things I love about the PCT is that there are no grizzly bears.
Yeah. Okay. So got the hip done, decided to click off some sections of the Continental Divide. And here we are back in 2018, back to the Nepal and the Himalayas. So what happened in 2000? I know you want, like every section hiker, typically out there, they want continuous footsteps on whatever trail they're doing and eventually, complete that long distance trail. So I think you have that same mind frame in the Himalayas. So talk to us about 2018.
In 2018, unfortunately, I broke my hand in skiing in February.
Jasmine, you didn't tell me that in our original interview.
Well, it didn't seem salient, but now I realize that it really led directly to some of my section hiking for 2018. So my ski season was over in mid-February, and as soon as my hand was well enough to get back out again, I went down and I started the Arizona Trail, which has always been dear to my heart because back when I was doing those Sierra Club service trips, and we would do trips in the Grand Canyon, several of those were building the Arizona Trail north of the Grand Canyon. So, that goes back a long way for me. So I went down, I did the first 100 miles of that in March. And then in May, I had a little bit left to do in Wyoming, and I got that done. I may be a little confused there. And then in June, I went back to the PCT and did a section north from Sierra City because it was snow-free. In 2018, I was going in July to the Indian Himalayas in the state of Ladakh. So since I was going in July, I needed to do whatever I could to get into shape for that. And so I found that the snow was going to be melted out fairly well north of Sierra City, and that fit into my time frame. So I did a little 180-mile section there and then went off to...
just a little 180 miles, Jasmine, that's all. A little 180 miles here or there. Okay. All right, get us to the Himalayas.
So that fall I went to the Indian Himalayas in Ladakh. And then in 2019, I decided to go back to Nepal and finish the Great Himalaya Trail, and going with the same company I'd gone with before, World Expeditions. And yes, starting near the eastern border too early in the season. Our trek started on March 1st, and they had a really big winter last year, and there was still a lot of snow. So it was really cold. We walked through snow about 35 of the first 45 days. We camped on snow most of the time. And it was really challenging. But I have been, when I came home from that, not too much later, I did more section hiking here. So just today, even, I've been going through some of my Nepal photos. And in spite of the snow and the cold, it was so gorgeous. You just have to, there's a certain amount of discomfort you have to go through to get to some of those places. And it was totally well worth it. But it was really challenging, challenging. But I made it, and
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
I went on through Section 4 again on this trip to make sure I had continuous footsteps. And actually, the way that World Expeditions runs that trip is halfway through, they have a little 3-day break where the trekkers go back down to Kathmandu to really rest up and get some good bunch of calories in and get their clothes washed. And since I was going to end after stage 4, I said I just wanted to keep walking across and arrange for a private trek for those 3 or 4 days so that I didn't miss that little section. And then what was great was
Jasmine, don't skip over that. Everybody else was taking the days off, and then you decided, okay, I can't do that. I got to get down there and finish that section. So that is no small feat. I can't imagine.
It was really gorgeous. The rhododendrons were all starting to bloom. We were finally out of winter for the most part. And then when I continued on into stage 4, about halfway through, then I was repeating the route I had done back in 2016 and going over that one technical pass, and everything went so much better for me. I felt stronger, and it was just awesome to come full circle and end that trip where I had begun it with many of the same guides and staff people that I'd been with in 2016. And they are all so fantastic. So it was really nice to be with some of the same people at the end as I had started with 3 years ago. And then one other thing about all this, though, is that it's really challenging terrain there, especially in eastern Nepal. A lot of crossing glaciers, crossing moraines, really rocky. And I was so happy this year going across those rocks and thinking, wow, back in 2016, this would have hurt so bad that I might have been reduced to tears. And it doesn't hurt at all now. So yay.
So yeah, it worked out. That new hip is working out for you.
It is working out for me. I've put more miles on this new one
than
maybe.
Well, Jasmine, that is totally awesome. I mean, to complete that, and I know that, that took a lot of effort, and we didn't even get into that. The planning, getting over there, what's happening when you're there, like villages you're walking through and people you meet over there. So that is totally awesome. So where are we now with, like, what mileage do you have left on the Pacific Crest Trail? And now I got to add, what mileage do you have left on the Continental Divide Trail? And I think I have to add, what mileage do you have left on the Arizona Trail?
Okay, well, on the PCT, I have done about 1,700 miles. So that leaves me with something like 950 left to go. I still need to do from about Etna, California, down to Old Station. Then I need to do everything from Whitney south to the Mexico border. And then on the CDT, I've only done Wyoming. So and I did that in a number of small trips, just 500 miles or so. So I have 2,500 miles left to go there. I remember a few years back, I was thinking, oh, well, I'll just do the Colorado section of the CDT. And then I started looking into it. It's like, oh, that's 800 miles. I don't know if I'm ready for that yet. So that was one reason I did my 500-mile trip on the PCT in Washington, is I felt I needed to build up to it. I really admire people who have never backpacked before and just hop on the PCT for a through hike, but that's not me. I like to build up slowly.
And I know you said your heart is being tugged one way or the other. So do you have it right now? Maybe which one you'll finish first, the PCT or the CDT, or does it really matter?
It doesn't really matter. And I think, it's a huge commitment to go to a place like Nepal or the Indian Himalaya. And so that requires a lot of advanced planning. And once you start, you really want to stick with it. But I think the beauty of backpacking here at home in the US is the flexibility. A few years ago, I was going to do Oregon. And it was the year that Oregon was on fire. Around the time I had been planning on going, 33% of the trail through Oregon was closed. And wow. I thought there's no point in trying to piece together little bits of this. I just want to go back in a year when I can hike through. So,
right. It's one thing with your hip, but it's another thing with walking into a fire.
yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
So, for doing stuff here locally in the US, I'll probably just play it by ear and see what feels right at the time.
Well, Jasmine, we're definitely going to have to catch back up with you and find out what's going on. And before we close out, you brought something to my attention, something that happened just this past year. You said you quit your hike early on the PCT this year. And I think you were talking about missing out on a key benefit of section hiking. So what happened and why did you end up quitting your hike early?
Okay, so I want to circle back just to that permits issue a little bit. I decided this year to section hike Oregon because those permits are going to become more challenging next year. There's going to be more restricted areas. So I said, okay, going to go ahead and do Oregon. And I thought, wow, once I get to the California border, if I could just make it down to Old Station, then I would have everything except from Whitney South. So I did make it to the California border, and I then kept going. But this was a really tough fall, I think, to be on the PCT, especially up in Oregon, because it was wet and cold. There were a lot of big rainstorms, and then there were snowstorms. I had to get off the trail. I chose to get off the trail for 3 days with one storm, for 3 days with another storm. It was getting to be really cold at night, unseasonably cold. When I would talk to locals, they would say, this is crazy. It's never like this. It's never this cold. I was hiking through snow in my trail runners. My feet were cold and wet. And at some point, I just realized one of the beauties of section hiking is you can choose a good time of year. You can go when there's not scads of mosquitoes. You can go when it's warm. I had envisioned an Indian summer type of trip, being in Northern California with beautiful, moderate days, and it just wasn't that way. And it was kind of funny because I left Etna. I was hiking out of Etna. I got a ride up to the trail. I started out, and the weather forecast was for really cold temperatures the next couple of nights. And the forecast kept fluctuating. First, it would say it was going to get down to 18 down in Etna, not up on the trail. Then it would say, no, it's going to only get down to 26. So I started out from Etna, and I still have some signal. I think, I'll get another weather forecast. Now it's supposed to be down to 11 degrees in Etna. And I'm like, God, that's cold.
No, that's too cold.
That's too cold.
That's too cold.
But, I figured out, okay, how do I stay warm? How do I take care of all myself and my stuff to stay warm? And that all worked out pretty good. But after my first really cold night, there were different things like the Sawyer squeeze. It can't freeze. It doesn't work anymore after it freezes. I had some backup water treatment. Well, then my app failed. My phone battery was draining quickly. My water bottles were freezing. I woke up the next morning. It was so cold. And my plan was, okay, wake up, pack, go to get warm by walking.
Right.
I did. And as I was walking, my water bottles were freezing. And I was on the west side of this ridge for about 3 hours. So I was in the shadow for 3 hours, so cold. I was like, I should really quit. It was like me back on the GHT in 2016. It's like, I should really quit. No, I don't know. I'm if I get a signal, I'm going to call my husband and tell him he should tell me to quit, And I was going back and forth. And I thought, well, around midday, I'm going to drop down onto this Forest Service road. Now, I read it didn't have much traffic, and I pictured a dirt road and no one ever coming through. And I thought, when I get to that road, I'm going to cook some food. I'm going to get a weather forecast. I'm going to see if I can call my husband, and then I'll decide if I'm going to quit or not. And so I'm walking along, and I'm dropping down to the road, and I see it below me, and it's a paved road. I'm like, whoa, well, that changes things. And I came down onto the road. I started opening my pack to cook some food, and here comes the car. It pulls up. The guy asked me if I need a ride, and he would take me to Redding. And I wasn't even sure I was quitting yet. And I had I mean, I couldn't make him just sit there while I dithered around. It's like, am I quitting or not? And so I just said,
I don't think he was going to let you stay. Yeah.
And he
Well,
said,
Jasmine, on the East Coast, we call that the trail provides. I don't know what you guys call it on the PCT, but that was the trail providing what you needed, I think.
yeah, I think so too. It was really, I just had to make the decision and it seemed like the right thing to do. And yeah, it was Providence for him to show up right then and there in that way. So I hopped in and he gave me a ride to Reading and I took the Greyhound bus home.
And there you go. And guess what? As a section hiker, you can pick a beautiful time to go back out there and do it whenever you want and whenever you have time to do it.
Exactly.
Well, Jasmine, I mean, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast. This is not the last time the listeners are going to hear from you because I can't even imagine what you're going to do in 2020. So I think now's a good point where we've come to the point in the podcast where the guest is going to sign off for us by reading their own journal entry, statement, or quote that will inspire us to keep hiking section by section.
All right. Well, I tend to, on the trail, I don't write. I take photographs. I can't exactly share that. So I'm going to read from the end of T.S. Eliot's poem, Little Gidding. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown, unremembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning, at the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree. Not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard in the stillness between two waves of the sea. Quick, now, here, now, always, a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, when the tongues of flame are enfolded into the crowned knot of fire and the rose are one.
Jasmine, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Again, it's an honor. I really appreciate you having me.
And believe me, I'm not done with you yet.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Jasmine, for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed hearing about your section hiking of the Pacific Crest Trail, Continental Divide Trail, and in Nepal. I am really glad you got that hip taken care of and you are able to keep section hiking pain-free. And although there is nothing wrong with being just a section hiker, you are definitely a king-size hiker to all of us. Next up, we have Let's Talk Gear with Steve Kameyer as we continue our talks about gear. Welcome back to our Let's Talk Gear segment with Steve Kameyer. We're going to continue to mix things up a little bit with Steve as we learn more about his hiking pursuits and the gear choices he makes for those adventures and why. We know that Steve loves to be above 10,000 feet in cold temperatures, but today we are going to learn about a route that starts at the lowest point in the United States and requires careful thought when it comes to gear. After that, Steve is going to answer another listener-submitted gear question. Welcome back to the podcast, Steve.
Hey, how are you today?
Doing great. Really appreciate you coming back on and talking with us. And another trail that you're going to be completing that I'm excited to talk about and have you talk about is the low to high route. So when you first said this to me, I had no clue what this was. So explain to the listeners where the low to high route is and what is it and where does it go?
Sure. It is the lowest point in the contiguous United States to the highest point in the contiguous United States. And a lot of folks don't really realize that they're only 100 miles apart by the crow flies.
Oh, wow.
Badwater Basin in Furnace Creek, Death Valley National Park. It's 282 feet below sea level to Mount Whitney, which is we all know is the highest point in the 48 states at 14,508 feet. And it's about a 135-mile hike, but it's actually only 100 miles if you could just draw an arrow and shoot it right straight from one to the other. But it's funny. I was just rereading some of my information earlier today, and they actually featured this hike in 2017 in a backpacker magazine and called it the most extreme hike in the entire United States. And once you start digging into it, it really, truly is.
Wow. Now you sent me a YouTube film about this low to high route. And literally the film sucked me in like right away because of the gear and the terrain. And I think you just said the route is 135 miles. So talk to us a little more. What kind of terrain are you hiking on? And is there exposure? Like, what are we looking at here?
Sure. I mean, again, I say it like every single episode. I am one of those logistical freaks. If I have to, the more time I have to spend planning, the better the hike will be for me. It just always works out like that. And this one is no exception. It's 100% unmarked trails, basically. Well, until you hit the actual Whitney zone, which of course, once you're hiking up to Mount Whitney. But to leave Death Valley and hike across the Panamint Mountains into Lone Pine, you're on your own. Really, you're just on your own. And the one thing about this is the absolute most diverse conditioned hike I think you could possibly do in the United States. You start off, and another big thing about this hike is there's only really a couple weeks out of the year that you can really truly do it, because temperatures in Death Valley, the hottest temperature ever recorded on the face of the earth was 134 degrees in Death Valley. And then again, one of the coldest temperatures in the entire United States was recorded up on, Whitney. So you're definitely going to be hiking in 110 degree heat for a few days. And then you're slowly going to be transitioning into the higher alpine, and you could easily see below freezing temperatures and snow and ice. So you really do go from one extreme to the next, all in about a 10-day period.
Wow. So the planning for this, like, I can't even imagine. Now, I certainly want to visit Death Valley, but I want to be able to get back into the air-conditioned car. And and I certainly want to go to I will hike to Mount Whitney. That is for certain. So are you pre-planning water for the? I mean, Death Valley just seems like it's dry. And where am I getting my water? Like, what's happening with this?
Yeah, two things. A, there's almost no way that you can do this hike without having some type of ground support along the way. We will definitely be caching water in a few different places, but again, we were talking about 110 degree heat. I really don't drink that much water on a regular normal hike, but on days like this, I mean, yeah, you're talking 1 gallon to 2 gallons of water per person per day. So this is a very, very big time load for sure. And nobody wants to start off carrying 3 or 4 gallons of water with them just to hike for 2 days. So yeah, you definitely have to have some ground support. You got to have some friends that really care about you, and you're gonna have to stash some water along the way for sure.
So it starts in Death Valley. It's 135 miles. You go from the lowest point in the contiguous United States to the highest point in the contiguous United States. You're going from extreme temperatures from one end to the other. And I'm assuming I've got some gear questions about this, because I can imagine you have got to be extremely strategic, even though you might have support, as far as, I'm just thinking clothing right out the bat, because I think it's really exposed. So what are you wearing like in Death Valley?
Sure. In Death Valley, I'll actually be wearing shorts, but I will be wearing a long sleeve moisture wicking shirt. The Columbia shirts, the Columbia Silver Ridge light shirts, are some of my favorite shirts ever. And I actually have one on underneath here, but
I can see it, but they can't. So
yeah,
go Columbia.
Yeah, I wear one basically every day. But you will want something that's going to be quick drying, and you're also going to want something that is longer sleeve. And one really cool thing about those shirts is they have a little extra couple of inches on the cuffs, so it covers the back of your hand, so you don't get sunburn on your wrists or on the back of your hand. And then instead of having a traditional shirt collar, that collar actually flips up into 3 different parts. So it creates this little nest around the back of your neck to help keep off the sun also. And for the first time in my life, I will be hiking with an umbrella. I've never done that before.
I was going to ask you about an umbrella or a hat. Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about this umbrella.
Yes. I've found Gossamer Gear is making one made out of basically Cuban fiber. And so that'll be my go-to for the first few days. But yeah, gear on this trip is hellacious, to say the least. So when we're starting off, and again, this is something that I'm not much of a cowboy camper. But if it's going to be literally over 85 degrees during the nighttime, there's no sense in me having a tent and a nice high dollar quilt and all this other stuff. I mean,
Right.
I'm taking a sheet and a sleeping pad, and that's about it. So,
And I'm assuming it's Death Valley. It's not going to rain, right? It would be
right,
crazy if it rained. Okay.
exactly. So there's no threat of rain. And by me shedding the weight of a tent and an actual quilt or sleeping bag, that just allows me to carry a little bit more water with me, because water will be the number one key element.
Nice. Now, in the video you sent me, I watched, there were a couple points where they had to do a rappel.
Yes.
So are you carrying rappelling equipment, or how's that going to work?
Yes. That actually will have to go with me right from the very, very start. About 7 days into it, 7 or 8 days into it, is when you really make that one transition from desert to mountain areas. And that is in the city of Lone Pine, which is basically entering the Whitney zone. So everything that I have from the beginning, I will have with me until I hit Lone Pine. And that does include rappelling gear, ropes, belay gear, harness, gree, everything that you need. There's one serious one. It's about 85 feet. So it's a pretty good wrap. And then the other
that already eliminated me right from the get. Now I might go with somebody that knows what they're doing, but I freak out on that kind of stuff. I mean, even if I'm roped in. So you had me at Death Valley, and then you didn't have me anymore. No, but I'm really excited for you, because you're actually doing that this summer, right?
Yeah. Well, again, there's really, and I suppose it really depends who you are, but there's only a couple of weeks every year that you can really do this hike. If you hike during the summer months, it's just way too hot in Death Valley. The snow and ice up on Mount Whitney from this winter will not be melted until June or July anyways. So you really have to kind of time it out right. The last week of September, first week of October seems to be just about the perfect time to do it. Obviously, it does snow on Whitney every single month of the year, so you never know what you're going to get up there. But if you were to wait a little bit too long, when it gets cooler in Death Valley, then you run the risk of having horrible conditions on Whitney. So for a mountaineer like myself, I could see that being a possibility. But then you're just really extending the whole trip. If I'm going to go climb Whitney during the wintertime, I would rather it be one shot, one deal. That's my goal, like Expedition Whitney. Let's leave Death Valley out of it. So if you really want to do the whole 135 miles all in one shot, there's about a 2-week window every year that you can go. So yeah, it's a logistical nightmare.
So I've got a question for you. So last episode, we talked about the North Country Trail, and it seems to be, remote, long food carries. You got to be careful with your gear choices there as well. And on this episode, we're talking about the low to high route. So I'm seeing a pattern here, Steve. You seem to be an extreme mountaineer hiking kind of guy. So what is it about these unique trails that appeals to you?
I'm not sure. I think a lot of it has to do with, again, hiking is my life. It truly is. This is an all day, everyday thing for me. If I'm not out on the actual trail, I mean, I know a lot of people sit in their offices or their little cubicles during their 9-to-5 jobs, dreaming about the trail. I sit at my office and sell hiking gear all day. So hiking really is my life. And I love to do the actual logistics. I have files and folders of just information from research that I have done, and I've copied and printed off people's trail notes and trail reports. And I mean, I have stuff on hikes I may never even do, but just learning about trails and hearing people's thoughts about trails, that really gets it for me. And yeah, some of these more difficult ones, the more time and the more effort that I put into researching them, the more fun everything sounds to me. So
I love that. It's like the thrill of the chase, I think, just planning and putting all that together and then executing. So thank you again for introducing us to another, what I'm going to call extreme trail. And now we have another listener submitted question. This question comes from Jeff Morris. And Jeff says that he just listened to the interview with Steve about sleeping bags and quilts. His goal for this winter and upcoming summer is to do all the 4,000 footers in the whites. It sounds like Steve believes that quilts are the way to go and that synthetic is overall better than down. Can Steve make some recommendations as to brands for the quilts? He says he's 5'9", weighs about 150, and his current camping equipment is way too heavy and bulky for backpacking, so he's starting from scratch, building his hiking repertoire of equipment. So, Steve, help us out here.
First of all, man, I wish I could start all over and just, that'd be awesome. That'd be so cool. But
you can't, Steve. You have too much stuff. You got like 45 backpacks.
I know it. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. REI calls me whenever they run out of stock, but no.
Hey, add them to my list. Hey, I got stuff too. All right,
okay.
Let's help Jeff out here.
Sure. And maybe I might have come off a little bit wrong saying that synthetic was a better choice over down. That is going to be 100% hiker specific. They both have their number one qualities to them. Down is always going to be lighter. It's always going to compress a little bit better, so it takes up less space in your pack, but it always costs more, and it might cost 2 or 3 times more. Synthetic, on the other hand, is usually, for the most part, dirt cheap, but it is a little bit heavier, and it's going to take up a little bit more space in your pack. Another good thing is that synthetic will maintain some of its warming properties or some of its insulating properties, even when it does get wet. For me personally, I mean, I have a couple of $300 to $350 custom quilts that are, me, I'm all into the crazy designs and all that. For me to get a rip or a hole in one of those would just tear my heart out because it's such an expensive piece of gear. Whereas on the other hand, I have a $100 synthetic quilt that I'll climb into the tent with my 80-pound German Shepherd and let her lay on it with me because I really don't care. I mean, if she scratches it, gets a hole in it, whatever, so I'm out $100, or I'm really not out. I'm just damaging a $100 item. But so yeah, I mean, as far as that goes, that really is going to be 100% hiker specific. If you're just starting over and you're getting rid of all your old clunky Coleman heavy gear, and you want to and you want to start getting some of the good stuff, get yourself a down quilt. Just make sure that you are keeping it dry.
And it sounds like he's going to be doing a bunch of hiking up in the Whites,
right?
And I know that's a good place for down as well, and maybe hitting some other long distance trails as soon as he gets all of his equipment together. So basically, your recommendation is that he gets himself a down. 100% goes with the quilt, right, Steve?
Yeah, 100%. Go with the quilt, go with down. And again, just go through the extra effort to make sure that you are keeping it dry. Whether that means double, triple, quadruple check your tent to make sure you don't have any leaks in your fly. And also, even if you do need to carry an actual dry bag for your quilt, because I know that the whites can get a little bit hairy from time to time as far as the weather goes. Just go the extra mile. Make sure that you do keep that thing dry.
And I'm going to email Jeff and have him reach out to you, Steve, because I know you can help him a little bit further, because he did give us his height and his weight and asked us for some particular brands that you might recommend. Is there anything out there that's coming to your mind right now that you could say, hey, look at this, hey, look at that, or hey, reach out to me and I'll talk to you further kind of thing?
Definitely reach out to me and we can go a little bit further with it. Cost is always going to be an issue, and different companies have different sales going on as far as, different times. Lead time is also another thing, which it just baffles my mind, but I'm not sure why some of these quilt companies have to have 6 to 8 to 10 to 12 week lead times for an item that literally takes a day to make. But I guess that's just the nature of quilts. And once the quilt thing kind of exploded, everybody is super, super, super busy making them right now. So definitely reach out and I will be more than happy to help.
Perfect, Steve. Thanks for answering that. Thanks for going over some of the logistics of the low to high route and talking me right out of it. So appreciate that. All right, Steve, thanks for chatting with us and letting us get to know more about your section hiking pursuits. and your other crazy hikes that you're going on, and your gear choices for those adventures. If you guys out there have gear questions for Steve, please email them to me at jesternc2212@gmail.com. If Steve answers your gear question on the podcast, I will send you some backpacking gear flea market stickers. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and happy section hiking.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night, heading toward the morning light. I wonder if you'd wander with me, and I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. You're wondering if I go wandering with you, what kind of trouble we'll get ourselves into. Would it be wrong to tag along with a band of vagabonds? You wonder if I'd wander with you. So I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river. I'm wondering if you'd come wandering my way, if you ever get lost or if the trail leads you astray. The music of the pack can always bring you back. I wonder, can we wander away? And I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
For the ones who work hard to ensure their crew can always go the extra mile, and the ones who get in early so everyone can go home on time, there's Grainger, offering professional-grade supplies backed by product experts so you can quickly and easily find what you need. Plus, you can count on access to a committed team ready to go the extra mile for you. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.